The
let's talk
collection
about that.
team is also headed up by a separate Green Beret. They can move freely in the United States. They're not going to be sending up Mexican nationals. So you have to be on the Green Berets team to go do collections. If there's an unaccounted for loss, they come see you. They build the network of individuals that are purchasing the straw buys for the firearms to take them into Mexico. Like, people don't understand just how crucial the American military has been in the form of their, former soldiers, airmen. A lot of military personnel have been critical in the development of the Sinaloa Cartel.
Even Air Force, are you sure about that?
Let me tell you a funny story about Air Force. Okay, the Sinaloa Cartel exists today because back in the 1990s they were on their last leg, the weakest of all the cartels. Well, one of the men from Sinaloa, who's credited with being the most famous trafficker in all of Mexico, is named Amado Carrillo. Hundreds of songs written about him, movies. One of the most popular telenovelas of all time is based on his character. And Amado Carrillo gets credited with creating the most sophisticated airwing in the history of criminal endeavors. Let's just put it that way. And what's interesting about Amado Carrillo is he wasn't a pilot and he wasn't a logistical expert. See, Amado Carrillo gets the credit for building that airwing. And this is the airwing where they took 727, 737 civilian airliners, gutted them, turned them into cargo planes. Well, that entire operation was actually ran by a retired U.S. Air Force officer. I know the man. I'm a writer. I've spoken with a number of these individuals. I actually spent 2 days talking with this gentleman. Today, he's an older man in the late 70s, pushing 80. He's retired, lives up in Seattle. Well, he built that air wing. It was his logistical expertise that kept Sinaloa alive throughout the decade of the 1990s, using that way to get the product in. They're getting 30 tons a month into Mexico with the civilian airliners. All of that was conceived and built by a United States Air Force officer. Without that gentleman's assistance, there'd be no Sinaloa Cartel today.
All right, I digress. Let's talk about, can you help us understand better? The thing that went viral was you talking about the CJNG, their paramilitary wing was ran by 4 special operations guys. Mm-hmm. And then in my notes that you mentioned that there's that second Green Beret. Can you clarify all that for us?
Well, everything is done on the basis of teams and they're compartmentalized. From my understanding was with respect to the CJNG. Remember, when this was originally built, CJNG was still part of Sinaloa. It broke away and they formed a separate group. And it's important that we don't use hindsight, because when the men get involved, they don't know that 10 years later, they're going to be the number one organization and they're going to be at the top of the list of getting targeted. Circumstances develop that are unanticipated, quite frankly. And so, yes, you've got the 4 guys that were known. Now, I've spoken with the Special Forces guy in the last week. He said that his contacts within the intelligence community have confirmed that they know the identity of the 4 men. Like, I didn't know their names. I just knew their existence. And he said there are a number of other Army Rangers in addition to those 4. Now, I have a friend who was a Ranger who they attempted to recruit. So I've got a pretty good understanding of the pitch they made. Well, from what I understand, you've got the American Special Forces, which are utilizing the same protocol that was used to train the Afghani Army's elite units. And so they take that training, that protocol, and use that to build up the CJNG. So you've got former Mexican Special Forces, which serve as the day-to-day commander actually interacting with the Mexican nationals. But the Special Forces from Mexico are coordinating with the American Special Forces, who do the operational planning, the tactical responses to military operations. And they basically get the guys tuned up. From what I was saying, they use the same method as in Afghanistan, and the Americans are only there to put in assistance if it's necessary. Like the CJNG's people get sent out. So the day-to-day operations are the Mexican Special Forces. You've got a body of individuals that are just former Mexican military, and then that's supplemented by individuals from Central America, a lot of Guatemalans and Hondurans, which are their special forces. And so the Americans they use what I was told is they call it coaching from the rear, which is the mindset they utilized in Afghanistan, where they send the Afghani units out to do the engagements and they only get involved in the event something goes sideways. And so that unit, they don't just go around attacking law enforcement, and they don't go around attacking even Mexican military. They defend themselves when they're attacked. Like the 4 guys, they're responsible for maintaining the security details for the higher ups. So they do a lot of the training and they do the security detail for the, Mencho and the other bigwigs. And so when they engage, they do the tactical responses to military operations that are compromised because corrupt officers within the Mexican military call and tip them off. So they know when they're coming. So they always try to run away. They tried to run. When they blew up the helicopters out of the sky, they were trying to leave. The helicopters they fell into their formation. They started descending on their run. Well, in that circumstance, they had to defend themselves. But they weren't looking to blow the copters out of the sky any more than you had the same situation a few years ago when Chapo Guzman's son, Ovidio, got arrested. Well, that was a unanticipated arrest. Well, if you look how the Sinaloa operated, how'd they get him out? Well, within an hour, you had 700 men descend on the scene. And what was interesting is they already had the arrangement set up. While there was engagements on the street with the local law enforcement, they stormed the military base. They took all of the officers' families, put them in their homes, and then wired the homes with explosives. Then they called the general at the base and said, either you release him or we blow up all your families. So they'd already identified who all the officers are, where they lived, and had a prearranged plan. So that means these are tactics. They didn't develop this on the fly. This is pre-planned. In the event one of the big guys get arrested, this is what you're going to do. 1, 2, 3. Well, that's where the Americans get involved. They come up with the plans and they're executed by the military wings. They're soldiers. That's essentially, the big boys aren't. The colonels aren't in the middle of the gunfight. They're in the back.
Yeah. I've had some intel saying that there is Ukrainian military as well in Mexico teaching them drone warfare. Any have you ever heard anything about that?
No. The only group I know of are Israelis, and that's very limited. I mean, you hear a little bit about Israelis, but no, not Ukrainians. I haven't heard anything like that. There's a few years ago, there was a big leak. Essentially, it's like the Spanish language version of WikiLeaks. It's called the Guayacama leaks.